Here we go. There's that. Okay, we're recording. I'm gonna try the YouTube thing. We'll see. If it doesn't work, I'm fine with it. And we will make you the co-host, DeVon. Did it work?
I'm checking here. Let's see.
Okay.
If I can share my screen. Try that. Can you all see the screen?
Not yet.
Does that work? Okay.
Oh, there we go.
It's just black though,
All
DeVon.
right. Try it again. I may have to turn my video off while I'm on, because that sometimes slows it down a little bit. Let's see. It's spinning. There's so many of us. Zoom is like, they're having a party.
Yeah.
Yeah, it just says not responding. Oh boy. Let's see. I'll wait for it. Sorry about that. It was working fine. We tested it.
If you want, I can flip through the presentation, and you can tell me when.
But this is Arlene Jones from Sprout. In the meantime, DeVon, maybe you can explain to all of our participants who you are.
I got it. Thank you very much. I just want to make sure that you can hear me fine. Thank you. So you can hear me okay?
Yes.
All right. Because sometimes the audio is not working either. So thank you so much for the invitation. And thank you so much, Marcus, for welcoming us with that warm music. That's the joy of having musicians as friends. They often have their instruments handy. So thank you for that. As Stacy said, my name is DeVon Nolen, and I won't go over the whole bio. You have access to it. We'll put it up on the screen a little later. But working today as kind of moderating and facilitating a conversation. And I first want to ground us. Can you see the slides? Is that what the thumbs up was, Stacy? Okay, great.
Yes.
I first want to welcome you all and just offer a brief candle lighting as a grounding exercise for us. Let's see if I can get it to work here. We are all doing this work in the middle of a pandemic. I said I wasn't going to mention it, but it's happening. It's real. And somehow we're still being effective and having an impact. And so, of course, my lighter doesn't want to work. We'll light the candle later. But I will light the candle just as a means to honor ourselves and those of us that are doing this work. So let's see, it says loading. All right, so first, we'll do a quick overview of what we'll talk about today. And I think it's important you can hear me okay, I hope. I think it's important that we ground ourselves in the history of how dominant culture has impacted the culture of our food system. These impacts are deeper in disenfranchised communities, and that trauma is real and valid. And oftentimes it surfaces. And what you're seeing there is my bounty from today on the right. I had the joy of being able to pick my lunch, turned into a beautiful salad there. And that for me is one of the most freeing experiences. That for me is food justice, being able to pick food that is healthy for me and available to my family. So I just want to offer that as an intro. And if we could, I know we don't have time for all the attendees to do the introductions, but if you're interested, if you could maybe in the chat, just type your name and what role you play in the food system. It is, sometimes helpful for us to know who is in this virtual room with us. So if you're willing to do that. We'll go quickly over the agenda and workshop objectives. We'll do these quick intros, being mindful that we're all in this together. We are taking time out of our day today because this is something important to us. We'll talk a little bit about the objective, the history, and then a panel, brief video, Q&A, and then closing. And I know Stacy mentioned that we were going to 7:30. I thought it was 7, because I thought we were doing an hour and a half, but if we need to go to 7:30, I'm open to that as well. So just want to be mindful of folks' time. All right, so we know that as we were talking about planning for this and kind of what sparked the desire to have this conversation, we were, on the tail of the murder of George Floyd at the hands of Minneapolis police and all the uprising and civil unrest that came as a part of that. And I think it has sparked an interest even for folks who maybe have had the privilege of not having to think about race as an issue. And so as we were planning, we thought it would be important to talk about some of the history of our food system. And as we were, again, talking about why we even need to have this conversation, it's why is the issue of race even an issue for humans? Where did it come from? Race as a social construct. If you have, there'll be some references at the end as well. You may have heard of the Linnaean taxonomy, and Marcus will talk a little bit more about that later, but just the classification of human species and how race as a social construct has perpetuated systems of oppression. And I like to refer to it sometimes as an American caste system. You might hear about different caste systems in India, for instance. You're born into a certain caste system and you are relegated to that caste system. You're placed in that caste system for your entire life. There's no way to be upwardly mobile or to advance. That's where you're going to be forever. And so knowing that we're trying to tackle, at least scratch the surface of a dialogue that could easily be not just a weekend, but weeks and weeks and months of years of work to really get to the crux of it. We're just wanting to offer some history, I think is grounding for me. And so when I think about farming in Minnesota, I think about the fact that we are, I think, the 4th largest state for agriculture. And that agriculture is oftentimes commodity crops, things that can't be consumed by humans. We are, exporting lots of goods here. But there's also a tumultuous history of farming in not just Minnesota, but in, across the United States. And so oftentimes there's this erasure of Black farmers, and it's still happening. We have lots of research and data from the USDA, the socially disadvantaged farmers and ranchers programs that still exist. But one that really struck me in 1880, and that seems so long ago, when Black farmers were suffering the most in the economic downturn, they started to organize themselves into the Colored Farmers Alliance. This organization promoted economic self-reliance, racial uplift, and vocational training, and the expense of demands for political equality. And just imagine that context, right? There were no smartphones, there was no social media, there was lots of luxuries that we have now to help support our work that they didn't have when they were organizing during that time. Here, if I can get this to advance. Yeah. Okay, there we go. Sorry for the delay. Again, a lot of their links to these resources. I just wanted to offer some background. The Homestead Act of 1862 that provided free land to settlers is an important history as it relates to farming. I wish I could see all of you because I can't see both screens right now. But I'm curious how many folks have a history of farming, or the family farm has been a catalyst for stability for their family. Oh, I can see you there. Oh, there you are on that side. I can try to scatter it a little bit. Thumbs up. Any farmers? Any farmers on here? Got huge family farms, generations. I know some folks, 5th, 6th generation farmers, and it's just, there's a long legacy and history there that has created an opportunity for stability. Black farmers were shut out of that. And so when you think back again in 1862, when the Homestead Act was launched, I mentioned again this caste system, and like I said, there's a link to Carl's research around that, and how human organisms are categorized based on these different. I mean, it's really, I'm a geek, y'all. I'm telling you, I'm a geek. So I geeked out a little bit on the different classifications of humanoids and things like that. So if you ever want to geek out about that, I'm for it. And, you know, no understanding that chattel slavery was, you know, really impacted the originators of many of these agricultural practices. Those enslaved Africans were the ones who were working the land and building institutions and building these methods that are still practiced today. I'm sorry, somebody might need to go on mute. We got a little feedback. All right. Okay, good, we're there. I'm trying to go a little slow so you can read them. The other thing that really struck me during the research, is how the industrialized food system has been weaponized for poor people. I'm sorry, these slides are advancing on their own. If you have been involved in, as an example, some of the local policy work, or statewide or national policy work around programs like SNAP and EBT, there were exchanges that were really telltale for me about how food has been weaponized for poor people, those who are most disadvantaged as relates to these systems, just don't have access. And the question oftentimes we ask is, you know, what is the biggest barrier? Is it accessibility? Is it affordability? And we know that it's both. There are multiple barriers. We work hard through our work to dispel the myth that poor people don't want to eat healthy. The reality of it is that our industrialized food system is designed in such a way that the foods that we need don't get to us. When you talk about distribution, things like that, I'm telling you, we could do this for 4 hours, y'all, but we won't. So, and these slides will be available. Okay. I also thought about, again, we're doing this work in the middle of a pandemic, and our history of resilience. You know, in the Great Depression in 1930s, there's just some facts there about the impacts on the soil and things like that. But it was also a time of innovation and, again, coalition building and building of allegiances. DeVon is actually a local co-op that was founded in 1927, I believe, in St. Paul, right here in Minnesota. And it started as a Black social club and really grew and evolved into being able to host a co-op in St. Paul. Unfortunately, as with many things that have been built by Black folks in Minnesota, it was destroyed, excuse me, when they put in the highway. So DeVon, I also appreciate the history of that. The name is actually the first letter of the last name of the founders of the co-op. So some interesting history there too. And then there's also a picture here I thought was really cool of the Farmers Institute in Kirkland, Minnesota, in Swift County. Who knows where that is? I don't know where that is. In 1913. I don't know why I can't see you. Let's see. Sorry about that. Again, a little bit more about the history in World War I and World War II and how it impacted our food system. You know, encouraging civilians through these wonderful posters to consume more fresh foods such as produce, eggs, dairy products, and then also promoting a role change in how Americans ate long term. I won't read verbatim here, but there's some examples. You know, we think about spam. Spam is still one of the biggest exports from what I understand. And I've never had spam, but I've heard it has sustained quite a few people when we talk about the history of our food system. Just being mindful of time here. And when I think about this timeline, in the 60s and 70s, it kind of developed this, what they're referring to as the counterculture of this political storm of the 60s that, brought the food industry and political ecological agenda to the dinner table is what it says, right? All these converging issues were happening at the same time. And again, those in disenfranchised communities and oppressed communities were suffering the most. And so it sparked things like the Black Panther Party, which started the breakfast program, and many food programs are still modeled after that. But I thought this picture about community survival, Black Community Survival Conference, and this notion that we have to be ever mindful of our own ability to survive and be self-reliant in these systems that were not designed for us. And how do we do that, knowing that ultimately we all want the same things? Food is sacred. You will find out really quickly if you ever have to deal with a hungry DeVon, and no fun. I have to eat. Or those of us who are, have different health conditions or whatnot, that, our food is sacred, and not just across that, but across culture. Food is oftentimes the catalyst and the connector across culture. It's a great way to connect, is asking questions and giving opportunities for people to share their cultural foods, but also making space for people who don't want to do that. There are some things that are sacred to culture and they won't be shared across culture. So being mindful of both is important. I'm a big person of definitions. And so there, again, are resources at the end. But this definition is from Equity in Food Policy and what is meant by racial equity. And this graphic has evolved over time. You can see it there at the bottom, where it has equality. Slides are messing up here. Oh, sorry. There we go. Equality. I don't know why it's doing that. The end goal is liberation. This is a new one where it has reality and liberation there, and really curious about, questions, comments, how this image strikes you when you think about the notion of equality versus equity versus reality versus what true liberation looks like. And is that something that your organization has some clear and defined goals around? I did plug in a couple local and statewide resources. I am also a Minnesota Food Charter champion. And so if you want to go to that health equity guide, I think on page 4, you'll see someone who might look familiar, but there are multiple strategies that have been shaped in tandem with community and policymakers across the state. And is a wonderful guide. And when you think about implementation and what this looks like in your organization, what it looks like to become, and you'll hear more about that in the questions, someone referred to as anti-racist organization. And as I said before, developing clear equity and diversity inclusion goals is important. It's one thing to talk about what the challenges are, but it's something that's very, very difficult to measure success around. And so that's the real conversation is this something that's really achievable, or is the process in working toward it in itself a big part of the work? And that's what I believe. And there's also a reference there on the implementing equity guide at the end. So thank you for your attention to those slides. We're going to go into this section of where we kind of tackle some of the questions that were presented. As we were planning for this workshop, thought about, this is a big and lofty thing to try to tackle again in an hour and a half. And how do we make this most effective? And so we asked for some very pointed questions from the food access points about their interest in this dialogue around the intersection of food justice and racial justice, and help shape this workshop. And so to the left on the black are the questions. And I am going to invite my panelists to join. I believe you have their bio, so I won't take time to, I will allow them to introduce themselves. I'll maybe put the bios up on the screen here. Can we start with you, Latasia?
Whoa, of course you can. So my name is Latasia Powell. I work at Appetite for Change here in North Minneapolis. I'm a current student at MCTC studying law enforcement, trying to bridge the gap between the community and the police departments, and I feel like I can do that with the tool of food. So yeah, that's my little introduction.
Thank you. Marcus?
Hello, everybody. My name is Marcus Carr. I am the Director of Programs in North Minneapolis for an organization called Youth Farm. So teaching kids where their foods come from in different institutions in our community. Also, this has been a call to service for me. We're really trying to utilize this opportunity to come up with creative ways to mitigate some of the issues that people are having as far as their quality of life in my environment, in my community, North Minneapolis. And I'm also, a vet musician here in the Twin Cities. Prior, I had served 8 years in the U.S. Navy as a petty officer before coming back home. So yeah, it was awesome seeing all these beautiful faces, and I'm looking forward to continuing this conversation. By the way, DeVon, thank you so much for giving us this opportunity. And before I even let you guys go, I just want to say, give a shout out and let you know that we do have a family of, Mr. Blake that was shot in Wisconsin in our minds and hearts in North Minneapolis. This is it's going to be an ongoing conversation, and I hope we can, find a way to kind of hold these people accountable and at least talk about what it means to see this happening over and over again in our social environment. So thank you.
Thank you, Marcus. Thank you, Tasia. So the way we were going to go through this, because we did have some very pointed questions, is to just kind of talk about our responses to these initial questions. The first one is, and please, as you're going through this, I'm sorry to say this earlier, please jot down any thoughts that come up, because I know sometimes it's hard to have the Q&A at the end, and it's easy to forget what you were going to say. So please, if you can, either put them in the chat or jot them down so we can make sure we get your questions and comments. Thank you. So the first question we got is, how is our central Minnesota food system impacted by historic and current racism? And Natasha, do you want to go first?
Sure. Well, I'm gonna be 100% honest. I really don't know anything about the Central Minnesota food system. So if anybody would like to just let me know a little bit, then I can. Huh?
No, go ahead.
Can you hear
Go
me?
ahead. I'm listening.
Oh, I was just saying.
Yep, we can hear you.
I don't really know too much about it. Like, I know what we have and what's offered to us and how we are affected. But if someone would like to share. Okay, well, I know like in North Minneapolis, let me read this question right. Oh, so in North Minneapolis, for me, I feel like the food system is impacted by like racism and like the whole historic thing. You kind of mentioned it earlier when it comes to Black people here in Minneapolis that have started foundations around food. A lot of it was destroyed. You brought it up earlier. In St. Paul, the Rondo area had a lot of Black, food-based organizations, and when the highway came through, that was interrupted, and it kind of made those people in that community lose hope and lose the connection that we have to food, because we are connected through food. we connected to this earth. And so a lot of the people like lost hope and being connected to the food system and everything. And also like just from the past, you know, we relate growing our own food and learning about food back to slavery. You know, a lot of people be like, oh, I don't want to grow food because that's what slaves did. But a lot of people don't understand that is our history. You know, food don't just come from McDonald's. You know, you have to actually take the time and grow the food, real food actually. So yeah, that's what I have to say right now.
Thank you, Tasia. How about you, Marcus?
Yeah, how is our central Minnesota food system impacted by the historic and current racism? This goes back to the origin of the word race. I'm not sure if most people have researched the things that we're dealing with as far as social and environmental issues. This word race, when it comes to Black people, is a design by a very Eurocentric ideology. Started sometime around 1752 with Carl Linnaeus and his studies, collecting different species, animals, and plants. And he did a part of that on humans, and put them in different categories. The argument has been if multi races is what's considered rational taxonomy, which is what DeVon was talking about previously. Me personally, what I see now, based on that history, I can better deal with this disease, this thing that causes dis-ease, discomfort in our community, that leaves trauma within our body, generations after generations after generations. We're looking at about 400 years gap in between generational wealth building when it comes to ownership of land and things. Me, I'm on my journey. This year, I'm going to be finishing the beginning farmers program with the land stewardship project to buy anywhere from 5 to 8 acres for a social enterprise that I'm going to be starting in North Minneapolis. And it's taken us this long, and still there is a lot of barriers for a guy like me. There's a lot of challenges. I am going to be taking a very huge risk leaving my home, my community, where I feel safe, to go to a rural area and start building new worlds, to be a part of this food system. I'm also a part of the Homegrown Food Council with DeVon Nolen. And I've been learning a lot, and my voice has been a part of the changes that are happening. I'm glad that there is such a thing as a food council.
Might your farm be in central Minnesota?
I'm sorry?
Might your farm end up in central Minnesota? Who knows?
Well, who knows?
Thank you. I am looking at in the chat, and it's great to see folks. Please look at it. There's introductions, folks from all over Minnesota and Wisconsin. So this is great. I'm thinking about to Tasia's point. We were very mindful that we are not in central Minnesota, right? But that the challenges are very much the same. And having ventured outside of North Minneapolis many times in the recent years, after having never left prior to that, I noticed that there were lots of similarities. That as a city girl, it's easy for me to not understand what's happening in rural parts of the state, and thinking that everyone must be a farmer, everyone must have plenty of food because they're on the farm, right? But that's not what we found. And so when I think about how it's impacting, central Minnesota and beyond, I think about the farmers. I think about those who are growing the food, who are being impacted. Their health is being impacted. Their environment is being impacted. I think about looking at 400 years ahead, this generational wealth accumulation of land and ownership that we oftentimes see in central Minnesota, that we don't see in other parts. And it's hard to think about it that way, right? Because we oftentimes don't think about wealth that way, but the land is where the wealth really lies. And the health factor I thought about was the chemical high rates of cancer, and things like that. We don't talk enough about the impact on them. And I also think about the living conditions of the workers on the farms in central Minnesota, and maybe there's a field trip brewing, and we get to visit other parts. I see Carl's talking about food desert. Sorry, the chat's popping up at the same time. So I think about what happens in North Minneapolis affects our entire food system, and that unhealthy food imbalance that we experience here affects central Minnesota. And so even in the context of this question, I can speak about my own experience, but I also know that there are correlations, and there's likely someone having a similar experience as it relates to food access. But the next question is, how am I personally impacted? And I can go and talk a little bit about being intentional about engaging with people who are not like you. It's what the way that the pathology of white supremacy and racism works is that it allows you the privilege of not having to interact with people who aren't like you if you choose not to. We don't have that privilege as Black in America. It's not our reality, the way dominant culture is set up. And so really being intentional about, getting to know people who are different than you is my response to what is my role and how am I personally impacted. Tasia or Marcus, you want to chime in on that question?
Yeah, organizationally at Youth Farm, we've been having this conversation and working through this exact topic. And for me, I think a lot of the, my organization is majority Caucasian people, and they've taken the time to really dig into themselves to ask themselves the hard questions. White fragility. I'm not sure if any one of you guys have read any of these books that have come out around white fragility, and just trying to understand better, what it means to recognize some things that are affecting the people you're working with, or some of the behaviors and practices when it comes to different cultures. And really looking at, other practices from different people. There's a huge lack of acceptance when it comes to, other ways or other approaches when it comes to growing. As a matter of fact, some of the guidelines and regulations in our food system really limits, some other people from practicing their traditional way of growing. I also encouraging people to really share your thoughts and your feelings with the people around you, and be honest about it, to ask yourself some of the hard questions about the current and historic state of our food system, some of the exploitation of our food system. And those things are not things that we can internalize and learn from a book. Like I said before, most of the system we're living in now was created based on scientific study by very Eurocentric ideology, coming from scientists in the Age of Enlightenment, I believe is what they called it. And most of those things weren't accurate. They were made up and exaggerated by these people, and we adapted it to now as our current institution. I mean, everything, our constitution, education, everything is based on, these very old way of seeing the world. So I'm really glad everyone is here, and I'm really glad everyone is joining this conversation, and hope that we can actually change some of those things.
Well, make sure you check out the chat, Marcus. You got some invitations to come to Wisconsin, Central Minnesota with your farm.
I would love it.
Doug and Kathy also said they just finished reading White Fragility, and they highly recommend it. So yeah, make sure you all are checking out the chat. It's a great way to check in with folks. Thank you for that. The next part of that question, I think, leads into, continuing the discussion of why it has been difficult. Why has it been difficult to construct an external communication addressing racism on behalf of my organization, is what the question says. And when we were, having some dialogue about the challenge around that, I think it's really important to understand that you have to be truthful and speak from the heart and say and face your truth and say, you know, I don't know. And sometimes that's the hardest thing for us to say, is to admit that we don't know. And the second hardest thing is to apologize when we're wrong. You know, I teach my children that instinctually there is this visceral thing that happens to your body physiologically when you've been violated. And I believe those instincts are the survival instincts that have helped humanity get to the point that we are now. When that happens, when something happens, you will know in your body, right? Or you'll see the other person who's been violated. You will see, you know, 85% of communication is nonverbal. You will see some type of nonverbal cue that what happened might have been offensive. And the biggest step is acknowledging that and saying, I see something happened. Even if you don't know how to articulate it, you don't know what it was, just acknowledging that something happened. And then as it relates to directly around communication, I think the challenge has been, you know, is it disingenuous for my organization to make you know, public communication around addressing racism? We are, you know, don't really have any internal work around anti-racism. We don't want to just do it as a formality. But it also looks like, maybe it looks like we don't care if we don't make a statement, right? And so I think that is a part, you know, of what you were alluding to, some Marcus, is just within your organization, having those internal conversations and doing that difficult work, knowing that it's going to be uncomfortable. You're going to be triggered. They're probably going to say something that you don't understand, or, you know, a differing worldview. But that is part of the process, is working through that, you know, for all humanity, not just for you. And so that's my initial kind of, you know, thoughts around. And the last thing I would say is just employing the services of a professional who can help you articulate your thoughts in a way that language is important. Sometimes the words that we use don't always convey the sentiment or the feelings. And so, you know, that may mean employing someone who has that expertise around communication, or, you know, that family member who made it to college and maybe a better writer than me. You know, those are some of the resources we can tap into. I'm just mindful that we are talking to an audience of folks, you know, in parts of the state and parts of our region that are rural and may not have access to the same resources that we do here in the city, Marcus and Tasia. And so I'm, you know, thinking, not having that be my lived experience, what are some things that you can tap into? So I really look forward to the questions. Thank you. Marcus or Tasia, any thoughts on that?
So I was just gonna say, the first thing is, I feel like it's hard to have these or difficult to have these conversations, because a lot of people, when racism is brought up, they get scared. And so I agree with everything DeVon said, and I just want to add, like, just being open and knowing that people come from different backgrounds, cultures, religions, and just being open to others' thoughts and feelings, and not always thinking your way is the right way, because everybody comes from somewhere different and everybody thinks that their way is right. But just being open and understanding, I would say, will be a better way when addressing these type of issues externally from your organizations.
And that next question about, oh, go ahead, Marcus, I'm sorry.
Well, I was gonna just add, you know, that the reason why it's really difficult to construct an external communication addressing this stuff is really because a lot of people that are dealing with the benefits from the system, and that's an internal conflict between privilege and being, you know, uncomfortable about this conversation. I love having the conversation. I invite anyone to reach out to me. My contact is on my bio. If you do want to continue just like having that, I wish we were in person. And it's like the one downfall of like COVID, because a call and response pedagogy is a very awesome way to come to, you know, mutual understanding. Also, just being aware of, you know, what's happening, you know, outside your comfort zone. You know, pay attention to the people around you. There are some people reacting based on trauma, previous trauma, and things they've lived through and seen. And I think sometimes those things are dismissed, you know, because we're living in a system, functioning in a system that's not, like DeVon said, not necessarily built for us. We have to, you know, we have to live. So sometimes it's just like dismissing our feelings instead of feeling our feelings. So it's one of the things that creates construct in this conversation. So if you see any person of color, especially, you know, descendants of like free slaves, you know, African American, Black people, in going through, you know, a very hard time in your organization, or struggling to communicate, or feel like they're not being heard, or you know, definitely speak up, say something, because silence in that, you know, really implies consent, and kind of takes away the enthusiasm in actually engaging people in this conversation. Why talk to someone who isn't listening? I'll stop there, DeVon. I talk a lot, by the way.
You're doing great, Marcus. Thank you. All right. So the other part of that is, you know, what are the real and perceived barriers and repercussions? And I talked about that a little bit. You know, the challenge of, if we say something, we don't say the right things, or not saying something altogether. And the reality is, you can't please everyone, right? So there is a strong likelihood that you will be misunderstood, and to be prepared for the backlash. It's also important to create a system of feedback, so people have a way to tell you how they feel, rather than storming in your office and, you know, slamming something down on your desk, or, you know, meeting you at the farm and with a shovel in hand, you know, talking about their what they're experiencing. And so creating those systems of feedback, sometimes evaluation is the piece that where we kind of drop the ball. You know, we're really good at visioning and planning and even implementation, but how effective are we at evaluating ourselves and evaluating our effectiveness? So the barriers and repercussions, like I said earlier, just tapping into the resources that you have. The challenge, I would say, is to be cautious, not to just go to that person of color, that one person of color at your organization, or that one person of color in your faith community, and asking them to bear the burden of all their people group. And you know, it takes building of relationship, it takes intentionality, and it takes being genuine and authentic. Folks will know if you're BSing, and they will not respond to you. And that's just across humanity, right? Like, that's how we have survived. But if your intentions are in the right place, I would say 95% of the time, my experience has been that people are willing to share, people are willing to say and learn, and learn together. So any other comments or questions about that question, Tasia or Marcus? The real and perceived barriers or repercussions?
Yeah,
I think
you
you
know,
might. Oh, go, Marcus. You could go.
you sure, Tasia?
Yeah, you could go.
Yeah, you know, I would like to know, like, some of the perceived the barriers and you know, repercussions that, you know, you guys have dealt with and faced around this conversation.
Maybe
Yeah,
you type some in the chat there, if the folks are. Yeah, that's a good idea, Marcus.
yeah. So if you can add that, that'd be great.
Tasia, what were you gonna say?
Oh, I was just gonna say, DeVon, I really forgot. I know it had something to do with like language, as being like
Mm,
a barrier. And I'm not just talking like people speak in different language, but we use a lot of different words that mean the same thing or mean something different to somebody. So understanding that.
Give us an example
Um,
of a word.
well, I know like when we at community cooks, like some people say a saucepan and some people say a skillet, and like it's the same thing,
mm,
but we use two different words. And so just really understanding, like, if someone is using a word and you know it means what, you know, like the meaning of what they're trying to say, like, don't try to correct them and make it the way how you want it, like accept it the way that it's brought to you. And I had something else to say, but I really forgot. So if it
It's
come
okay.
back to me,
Yeah.
if it come back, I will speak on it.
Yes, please. It'll come back to you. Thank you. Thank you for that, Marcus and Tasia. I'm gonna check the chat real quick. We got some chat action going there.
I did remember what I was going to say. Hi, look at that.
Great.
So since we was on here and we was really talking about food and like racism and everything, another barrier I thought of was like education. A lot of people don't have, you know, access to education, and some have too much access to like education. And I'm not talking about like going to school. I'm really talking about like around food, because we use food a lot to start these conversations that a lot of people don't want to start. And just realizing that a lot of people don't have basic knowledge around food, where it comes from, who grows it, how it grows, and things like that. So education and language to me is like the top barriers when it comes to these things.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Tasia. Make sure you check out the chat. We got some more comments coming in there. The next question we were going to tackle is, what would it look like to become an anti-racist organization or business? And we appreciated the questions because it really, you know, helped us shape this huge topic into something that is digestible, or you know, we can start to process together in an hour and a half. And I think oftentimes one of the strategies that we use as an organization or business to be deemed as anti-racist is to hire a Black person, or a, you know, person of African descent, or Asian person, a person of color, a BIPOC person, Native person, and that individual into an organization that is built on the same type of social constructs that says dominant culture, dominant ways is the way to be and know and do. It's really not being effective. I have seen it time and time again, where oftentimes the person of color is brought in at the lowest kind of entry level position, and they're kind of relegated there for the duration of their career. Or you see the reverse, where they're pushed up the ladder into a leadership role that they may or may not have the skill set for. And so it's really about capacity building and really being intentional, meeting folks where they are, and, you know, saying, I don't know. Once again, I don't know how to do this. And what I found time and time again is when I ask people what they need, they will tell you. They will oftentimes tell you everything that they need. And creating different methods to do that. It may not be a face-to-face conversation. It may be a quick survey. It may be an opportunity for folks to submit videos. You know, there are various mediums that we can use to make that accessible, rather than, you know, using written word or having a face-to-face conversation. So really thinking about the innovations that you can use to be accessible to those that you serve. And that is, you know, it's a process. I, as a part of my work, have done this with different organizations, and sometimes folks are not ready for it, and they don't want to do that work because it's not easy. It's difficult. The biggest part of that work, I would say, in becoming an anti-racist organization or business is doing your own personal work. Having those real conversations about how we were socialized to be, and our own biases and prejudices that we all carry as humans, and how that plays out in our life and how we treat people. I have my children are wrestlers. I'll tell you a story. My children are wrestlers. We're a big wrestling family. Who knew that wrestling was such a huge thing, right? Until they got started. And so we had the chance to travel to different parts of Minnesota for wrestling. And we were oftentimes the only Black team. And I have had kindergartners who have made racial slurs toward the children who were wrestling. And you're 5. It's like, that's a learned behavior, right? They've heard those words, they've heard those sentiments, and we just need to own up to that. We need to own up to the fact that we are shaping the world that we live in every day, and being honest with ourselves about ourselves. I know I have biases, but when they come up and I address it, and I apologize when I'm wrong, and I don't apologize if I don't mean it, just flat out, like, that's the reality of it. Because people know when you're BSing. So I'll stop talking. Marcus or Tasia?
Yeah, I just want to come in real quick because you said two of the things that I was going to say is being aware and being accountable. A lot of times, you know, we don't take responsibility maybe for our own actions, or we don't speak up when we see something that's wrong, you know. So just being accountable and being aware, stepping back, taking yourself out the scene and looking at the movie like as if you isn't in it to get a better understanding of, you know, what's going on. So that's just my little piece right there.
Yeah. Just to add to that, you know, just because, you know, someone is getting paid to do a job doesn't mean you can't, you know, get to know them, you know, in a, you know, place, you know, what it would look like to become an anti-racist organization or business to me would be a place where I can really process anything my way and be able to verbalize that with people I'm working alongside without that thing being sized up, challenged, or silenced. These are my experiences. I come with a lot of things that most people can't afford. I'm a creative. I'm a very public person. I'm, you know, tend to, you know, process out loud because I really want to include my entire village around a thought process in producing anything. So what that'll look like for me, and farming isn't like a job, like a regular job, like working in an office underneath, you know, fluorescent lights and stuff. It should be something that we do together. The fact that, you know, like people isolate in this opportunity is it really sad because we miss out on the medicine of it all. We should really lifting together, being together, and trying to create better ways to serve other people. And, those things are some of the things I would want to see in a anti-racist organization. Just people working to enhance each other's strength and being present. Also, um, the idea of classism, or hierarchy, is a very, for me, is a very, you know, a European ideology. I tend to, I love it because it works in some cases, but there are also Afrocentric ideology or practices from other places that could help the human side of things. You know, you want to take this opportunity, this conversation need to be based around a human principle, not necessarily, you know, trying to, you know, fix or, you know, anyone or anything. There's nothing wrong with us. We're all in a system that we've inherited. And I want people to understand that, you know, especially most white people, you know, I want them to understand that, you know, that no one is saying that you're a horrible person because of your privilege or like the fact that you're white in America. And just kind of have this conversation. Don't be afraid of this conversation. The only reason why most people of color won't have this conversation with you is because, you know, they can tell when it's not genuine. Um, so I really encourage people to connect on a personal and human level so we can start creating medicine instead of causing dis-ease and discomfort in our communities. I'll stop talking now. DeVon, you still there?
Thank you, Marcus. Thank you, Tasia. So we're about 6:30, so we're gonna pivot. This will be our last question, and we'll pivot to the question and answers, and we'll go back through the chat again. So please, questions, comments, get them in the chat. We'll come back through. And then, so this last question was really exciting for me because we get to envision, right? History is really important. I didn't think that in high school. I will say that. I'm a mathematician. I thought math was the most important thing. I should have paid more attention to history, but now that I have school-age children, and guess who's homeschooling? So history is really important. And so not just as a frame of reference, but I noticed patterns. There are some real deep patterns that are in our history of civilization, right, and humanity in this world. And it's almost like looking into a crystal ball, and we can say that we know that there's this pattern of things, and this is what will likely come, right? So when you think about things like the Farmer's Almanac, which who doesn't know what the Farmer's Almanac is? It guides so much, right? There's so many things that are guided by this historical documentation of patterns, and so there are examples like that. And now it's our time to be a part of making that history and documenting it and sharing it in a way that will be useful for the future. I'm a very futuristic thinking person. I'm a person of African descent. African people are very futuristic thinking people. And I stand on the shoulders of giants. I'm standing on the shoulders of giants, sitting in this chair right now, of those who paved the way and created opportunities through blood, sweat, and tears and sacrifice. And so when I think about an equitable food system, it is one that is about self-reliance. You've probably read the bio, because I should have sent the shorter bio, Stacey. The bio of some of the policy work that I've been doing over the years, and have had the opportunity from working at the grassroots level with coalitions like the Northside Fresh Coalition, got my Northside Fresh shirt on, all the way to the White House, and working on the Farm Bill and Child Nutrition Reauthorization Act. And what I found is that every issue is an economic issue, no matter how we frame it. And these systems of dependence are operating in exactly the way that they were designed. And so when you have electeds who are in position to try to make change, they may have the best of intentions, but they are also subject to said system that they have now become a part of. And so we have to make sure that we are having this conversation around the economics. I think about food as medicine. I think about food as a basic human right, as Elder Michael Chaney has coined and taught me many, many things. He's the reason why I'm even doing food work, right? He was doing this before I was born. That's what he likes to tell me. That's what he likes to tell me. So food is a basic human right, and knowing that a lot of what we're operating under are ancient ways of knowing and being. There are things that are cross-cultural. I have had the privilege of learning about different farming cultures and different farming communities, and the importance of their ability to survive in passing that down. I also think about knowing that the dominant culture's way of doing things is not the only way. And as Marcus said earlier, really being intentional about making space for other ways of knowing and being and doing, knowing that the ultimate goal is the same, that we want to be able to meet our basic needs. My background's in psychology. I think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We want to be able to meet our basic needs. The goal is to become self-actualized. The majority of us never actually make it there. But some are nowhere, not even close as we are, because they are unable to meet their basic needs. And so I think about just one example. Minnesota has a robust farming community and also a robust farmers market community. I've been managing farmers market for 6 years. And a lot of our work, I'll put more resources in there as well, is about leveraging public markets as economic drivers. And so when we talk about an equitable food system, equitable food economy, it's really thinking about what is the infrastructure that we need. Really thinking beyond our immediate community, because that's really important. Local is very important, but really also taking a regional approach. There are efforts happening in Detroit and in Wisconsin and Illinois, Indiana. There are things that are happening that regionally we know pretty soon we may not be able to get our tomatoes from California, right? So what does it look like to develop the infrastructure that we need for your ground growing? So I'll stop talking, because this is where I get fired up when you start talking about the vision. Marcus or Tasia?
Yeah, envisioning an equitable food economy. Me personally, I'm gonna really pursue ownership. I want to own land. I want to wake up and actually plan, my own quality of life and finances. That's something we've never been taught. I've never been taught. I didn't have me when I was a younger person, and now I'm actually building capacity by educating younger people, starting at age 9 years old to 25 years old in North Minneapolis, leading the food movement, the youth-led food movement. And I'm super proud of this work, not because I needed a job. This opportunity was given to me and referred to me by DeVon, Nolen, and some of the people that have been directing me and guiding me in North Minneapolis, like Michael Chaney, for quite a long time. And I have stepped up to it and found my own personal voice in it. Also, I learned that I'm like an amazing grower, and I really want to take advantage of that opportunity. But looking at the history, this program I'm going to be starting, the beginning farming program with the Landscape Arboretum. There's never been a Black person. There's 1% of people of color that's been a part of that program, and I'm super excited to join them and really, learn from them. And I'm sure I have a lot to also teach. And I'm hoping that I'm going to be invited and they're going to embrace my presence. I'm really looking forward to it. People is what I do. So I'm hoping to grow all the possibilities. Envisioning an equitable food system, I want to be free to really revitalize my own soil, decide on what I'm going to grow, kind of find my own target market, the needs of people in my community, and try to, serve that need. We should balance out, like the idea of just a better life, being able to afford my basic need, which is like shelter, some place to put up my teacups and saucer, and gaining some form of equity and building some form of generational wealth. Yeah. Are you there?
Are you having crumpets too, Marcus?
Am I what?
Are you having crumpets with your tea?
I do want some crumpets with my tea. That's all I'm asking.
Tasia? Thank you. Tasia, comments on that?
Here. Let me just read this question because I'm kind of like
read
in the middle of a lot.
How can we begin? Go ahead. Yep.
How can we begin to envision an equitable food economy? Well, a lot of what DeVon said, I totally agree with. Some of it I did miss out on, so I might repeat what she did say. But I would say, when we buy food from like farmers of color and everything, I would say accept the prices that they bring, value the work and all the effort it takes into like growing the food or producing the food, traveling the food, like understanding that being a farmer or a grower and things like that, it takes time, and just being accepted to like what they bring to you and not like turn it away. Like when we look at food, I know a lot of people, we had a past incident where like some food was brought in, because it was brought by a person of color, they kind of felt like we was just giving giving people just anything, instead of understanding that food grows all kind of ways, have scratches, abused, it looks a certain way, especially when you're growing it yourself. So not like denying that food, accepting these farmers into these areas where farmers usually aren't, having them more at the table than just on the menu is how I really look at it.
Mm.
Thank you, Marcus and Tasia. So we are at about 6:40. I know, Stacey, originally you said 7:30. I'm open to either, but really want to get to hear from folks who are joining us. Thank you so much for your attention and listening. And there are some comments and questions in the chat, I think. So we'll go through looking at the chat. Everything's loading so slow, sorry. Before we do that though, I just want to show a quick video. Bear with me here. I'm trying to swap screens. Okay, let's see here. I tried to put a link there, but it didn't. Oh, wait, let's see. Can I make it? Oh, let me see. Let me try it this way. Can you hear it?
What were you asking?
Can you hear the video?
Oh,
okay,
no.
Sorry, let me try one more thing.
I see your pic.
Okay, awesome. My computer's been working fine all day until now. Okay, here it comes.
I can play it.
Sorry about that. Yeah, it's coming.
Life is as simple.
We can't see it, DeVon. DeVon,
Yes. Did you say
we
there's no
can't see.
sound?
We can't see it. I think you got to share your screen like you did before, and then play the video.
Okay, hold on. Sorry.
Should I introduce this video to him?
Yeah, go ahead. I'll try to stop it. Go ahead and do the intro. Sorry. Why is it
Okay.
not-
Yeah. So, you know, I tend to capture a lot of our community. I really want people to see what it looks like on the ground in North Minneapolis. You know, it helps with the perception of this being, you know, a horrible place. But for us, it's paradise. That's why most people are coming, buying up properties and moving in there. You know, this video is video of young people in my outdoor classroom, and is accommodated by Michael Cheney, who is an amazing poet and an agrarian. Um, who's been leading this movement for quite a long time, like DeVon said. And I wanted to capture him in his true voice. And so I produced a short to introduce us at different conferences. Partners and you know, friends that are growing on the north side has been using this image just to kind of start their conversation. So I hope you guys can see it, and I hope you can join us in one of these gardens or at dinner someday when COVID is said and done, and get to know some of these babies you're about to see in the video. There you go, DeVon. You can, if you play it now, we might be able to see it. I see the presentation. There it is.
Can you hear me now? Okay, we'll come back to it. I'll get it to work, and we'll also try to send the link. Sorry about the technical issues there. So
I
for
can,
the next part, yeah, we'll do it at the end, Marcus.
okay.
So for the next 15 or 20 minutes or so, I think we can tackle. I put side by side here on this slide where you can see the questions that were developed by the group, and just really thinking about what do you see as next steps for your organization. And I know we have a fairly large group, so if folks are willing to type in the chat, or if someone wants to chime in directly, just let me know. As long as this technology cooperates. Are you there?
Yeah, we're here.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear
So
you.
sorry about all this. We'll get through it. All right. So I'm going to go back through and just look at some of the questions that were already posed or comments. And if folks have other comments or thoughts around what do you see as next steps for your organization to foster equity and inclusion? And I understand that this is a question to really ponder on. And so I don't expect you to have a full-fledged answer, but if there's some things that have been kind of sparked, or things that you want to do more research on, please include that in the chat, or let Stacy or myself know if you want to comment directly. Let's see, we got to intros here in the chat, and then it's really great to see people from all over. You're able to see the chat there as well, Marcus?
Yeah, I'm looking at it.
Okay.
Hey, Carl. I'm looking at Carl.
Yep. From Monticello and Little Falls. Purple carrot. Just looking for any questions there. Carl said he was there in the 1960s and 70s countercultural. Lived through that, right? Another introduction.
There's one question that says, we've heard this from many ethnic groups. This is Marlene in our area. How can we introduce strategy, and how can we be intentional about the strategy? It's an amazing question.
Mm-hmm.
I do.
Is that the chat you're reading it from? Are you reading it in the chat, Mark? Okay.
Yeah, it's from Arlene. Arlene, I do. That's an awesome question. You know, a lot of people agree that equity is needed. What people really sometimes don't really think about is that, there's no such thing as equality without equity. And they'll agree that this stuff is needed without thinking about really what it means for them, for the people around them. I do think first, before you move forward with policy and implementing any kind of strategy, you should have a conversation with the people in your organization, or if there's any body of color in your immediate family and friends or coworkers. That conversation will be something that you should pose to them just to kind of polish up and be genuine about your approach to strategy. Secondly, just recognizing what it looks like, what injustice, what racism would look, what an inequity, inequitable workspace would look like for the people you're working with. So it's a very internal struggle. I think we all have to ask these questions before we move forward as a collective. Is there anything you can suggest for something like that, DeVon, as far as introducing strategy that might help someone?
Yeah, I was trying to, sure. I was trying to find the question in the chat. Maybe it just went to you, but the first thing I think about, and Arlene, these are also kind of on the cited sources slide at the end, but there's some implementation guides, right? They're toolkits. At the Minnesota Food Charter has a health equity toolkit. Again, I'm a food charter champion, so I'm gonna always champion these resources because a tremendous amount of work went into developing them, and we did not want them to just be documents that sit on a shelf. We want them to actually be used. And so if you haven't checked out the Minnesota Food Charter resource page on their website, there are toolkits there. I think also to echo some of what I heard Marcus say is to employ those various cultural communities to be a part of helping to shape it, and understanding that it may take more time than what you anticipate, understanding that it will mean you will have to relinquish some power, understanding that it may look different than what you anticipated going in. I know many leaders of color who are in leadership positions who have their validity questioned often, and so we shouldn't have to quote a scientific study about my lived experience. I am the scientific study, right? I can tell you about how the pathology of white supremacy and racism has impacted my life directly, and how it impacts the lives of my children. And so there's validity in that, right? And so we shouldn't have to share our stories and have this kind of extraction of resources and not really know where it lands. The other thing that's important in deploying these strategies is to pay people for their time. Community members, you'd be surprised how far and what might be considered a nominal amount can go a long way in helping to support their families. It also sends the message that you value their time and their expertise. Oftentimes in my communities like mine here in North Minneapolis, there's this constant extraction of resources, a constant extraction of our intellectual property and our ideas. And we never know where it lands, and our conditions don't change. I've been a part of many tours, quotes, of, you know, folks coming from everywhere, not just because of the civil unrest and the damage that was done, but even prior to that, as a part of our food justice work, they want to come and see. And I thought to myself, well, why don't we ever have a tour of their community? Why don't we ever take a tour bus and ride through Monticello or Staples or Little Falls? Is there something to see there? And so it felt very much like we were on display, and it was kind of this spectacle to be seen of these conditions that were actually engineered. The people here are not bad. It's not that we just have bad people. People are responding to the conditions and the environment around them. And the food and the lack of access to healthy food is huge. I mean, I could quote all the scientific studies if you want that, but again, I'm speaking from lived experience. There's lots of research that supports, you know, I'm sure there are probably nutritionists or dietitians maybe in this group, how what you eat impacts your behavior. So it's a multi-layered, multifaceted challenge. And I chose food justice because it was the one thing out of all of the isms that we deal with that I knew I could have a direct impact on. That picture of the food that I put as my first slide was food that I picked from our Appetite for Change gardens in my backyard garden today. And that's how I fed myself lunch. That to me is really what this is about. So I'll stop. I think I see another question. Maybe my chat is just catching up here, I think. I think your message didn't go out to everyone, Marcus.
It went out to you and Carl. Let me see. I was just sending her question so you can see it. See if any one of you guys had any suggestion or direction for her. The new question though is we are a startup food co-op with no employees and are working on building our ownership so that we can open our grocery store. With so few people of color in our community, how do we get authentic feedback, discussion, so that we ensure our organization is welcoming to people of color? We have begun to move into our area. We don't want to lean on a few people of color to represent the whole group of people.
Yeah, and I think that thank you for the question, Susie. I think that touches on a little bit about what I was saying earlier about just not tokenizing folks, right? So it's like, how do you do that and at the same time get their feedback and their guidance around building this? And so food, I'll just say that I have seen in cultural communities where they've had who's ever been to the what's it called, the international, doggone it, I can't think of the name of it. The big convention they have around international food here in the city, and we used to go for a field trip.
Global market?
No, it's called the Festival of Nations.
Festival of Nations.
Yeah.
Thank you. So what would it look like, Susie, to have some type of Festival of Nations in your community? Oftentimes those of European descent are from different cultural communities, right? And so it's one thing to be Scandinavian and Irish, and I can't speak about other experiences, but there's some culture there to be celebrated. There's food culture that you can leverage. And so I'm an event planner too. I love to celebrate. Let me just tell you that. Yeah. I love to gather. So COVID is really driving me crazy because I can't be around people. But having some type of celebration and doing that virtually, I think even you're looking at some of the innovations that Appetite for Change has had to deploy around our community cooks and different programmings where folks are in their own kitchens cooking and doing that virtually now. So really thinking creatively and not being afraid to ask. The other thing I really encourage is that the children are our biggest resource. And those of us who have kids know that once the children, or work with kids even, or have kids in your life, know that once they get fixated on a thing, they have that permission slip that they bring home, and there's a pizza party on the line to get this permission slip signed. I guarantee you they're going to make sure you get that permission slip signed, right? So how are the children in your community, because they're likely convening and playing, cross-culturally, how do they become ambassadors for your efforts? And how do we incentivize those who are asking to participate? incentives go a long way. I mean, I don't even like using that word. It should just be an exchange, right? And so we want to have reciprocal relationships in that it's not that we're always extracting, but that we actually have something to offer. Anything else, Marcus or Tasia, on that one?
Yeah, I like to second that, DeVon does love a good celebration. Like, I spent an entire season with her, serving our community with a salad bar, moving from event to event, feeding, thousands of people, just introducing people to healthier food options, things that we were growing on the north side. And I'm super proud of the work I've been doing with her. And yeah,
The big dinner party.
that's what it was.
That's
The
right.
big dinner
That's
party.
what we
That was
called
it.
it, and it was a big salad bar, y'all. No meat, just salad fixings. We got
You
pictures, we
know,
got video. We'll have to share some of that. But now with COVID, like, how do you have the big dinner party? But you do it virtually, right? And so
right.
there's some ways to be innovative. Thank you for that. And there's some other question I think in the chat there. Let's see here.
Before we go to the next question, I had seen a comment that I kind of wanted to
Sure.
comment on. It says, I think the barriers are cultural, not race. That is, for example, I don't hang out with people who support he who shall not be named. So for me, I would say I agree. But when it comes to like, I look at things from like more of a social class than race, especially when you get out of a certain social class and move to a next, you understand that it's more of like social than the color of your skin. But we always, make that like in competition, who's more superior or inferior to others, especially when it comes to someone's culture, someone's religion, or even like the money that someone have in their hand. So I do kind of agree with that, but it's like we always add race in there because we think that, poor people look like
with the babies. We can't hear you.
Oh yeah, how you know where I was at, and I was walking closer. So like I was saying, like we refer like race when we think of like poor, we refer it back to people of color, Black people. And then like certain cultures we look at as more inferior than certain other cultures. So that's how race get brought into this. But I just wanted to bring that up. Like we do as people, we look at everything from a racial point instead of stepping back and looking at it from cultural or social or religious and things like that. So that's kind of like a big eye opener. Maybe if we stop looking at it as race and take a step and look at it from somewhere different, we'll be able to move along faster than how we moving.
Right now we have cabbage and collards popping up everywhere. And recently my team made borscht. Our thing is to really dig into culture of foods. So we've been making a lot of foods from a lot of different places and culture. And our favorite thing so far has been like a good borscht. And we just sat around with sliced garlic and, black bread and this bright red soup and ate good, DeVon. You wouldn't believe it.
Awesome. Awesome.
Yeah.
I love to try new food, so I'm all down for a festival of nations. Somebody put that in the chat, and Cheryl did also put another resource in the chat there. It's an interesting read, Carl. Thanks so much for those who are offering resources. I'm sure Stacy will be able to maybe print this out. Oh, they need the recipe. Susie says she needs the recipe, Marcus. Don't get us the recipe swapping now. That we can definitely do. Now that would be really, that is also another innovation that we can still use, right? Even in the midst of this COVID. So 7:01, I'm quick time check. Were there any other questions or comments around next steps for fostering inclusion and equity?
Yeah, I seen some about getting food and getting to know each other, and that's kind of like my biggest thing. Sit down with each other and actually break bread and really get to know those who are in your community and not judge them based off of what you were told or what you see on TV. So that's all I really want to say. Really sit down and get to know those people. And food, it blurs all the lines. When you bring food to the table, it gets everybody talking. So that's all I really want to say.
Thank you. I'm hoping that This will be more some recipe swapping and some Festival of Nations work as we look at implementing some of these strategies within your organization. I won't speak for Marcus and Tasia, but I will because I work with them and I know how they operate. I will offer ourselves as a resource, you know, to work through this. And there are more comments in there from Cheryl, and you know, really the last comment I'll say, unless there's other comments or questions, is really thinking about culture as a resource. You may be interested in some of the work of the Culture Wellness Center. It's a local organization, 20-year-old organization here that has been looking at, the way I frame it is, how do we leverage culture as a resource? How do we get past all the isms and the differences and find our commonalities? And oftentimes what we find is we have more in common than we do that's different. Mary Jo Forsberg up in Starbuck is one of my favorite rural farmers. And we did some work together through a statewide coalition and did a workshop. And it was just me and Mary Jo just talking about being in Minnesota, you know, and growing food and raising families. And it was one of the most amazing experiences where you have this young Black woman from North Minneapolis, this real urban area, you know, sitting with a farmer from rural Minnesota. And Mary Jo's amazing, if you don't know Mary Jo, and her work with the University of Minnesota. And, you know, we were able to have a real dialogue, and it really impacted my work in a way that I still feel. So this last slide is just some of the resources that we referenced throughout the presentation. And lastly, just thank you so much for having us, and thank you so much to Cheryl and Region 5 and Stacy and Minnesota Department of Ag for having us. And I hope this was helpful, and again, not the last time that we come together. And I like farm tours. I do venture to different parts of Minnesota. I was just up in Ely a couple weeks ago with my children, and I'm learning to appreciate more of my state. And so maybe we'll take some field trips. Anything else?
I want to say thank you. And if anyone out there is a part of this conversation that have any information on, you know, affordable land or you know, please let me know, because by the end of this year, I do want to go ahead and take that next step as far as ownership. And yeah, I mean, even if it's just a conversation to call and see what we're doing here in Minneapolis as far as the work on the ground, feel free to reach out to me. The contact is on our bios. And I agree with DeVon. I offer myself as resource. And I love it. It's not just resources. I'm actually learning alongside everyone here on this call. So I appreciate it.
We love to learn together. And there were a couple offers, Marcus, in the chat there. Folks are inviting you to their region of the state in Wisconsin. So any other questions or comments?
Well, I'll just comment. I'm Arlene Jones from Sprout, Minnesota, the co-sponsor of this 80-acre organic farm. Lots of my board members here, and a regional partner with Region 5 Development Commission. So Cheryl, I see your pretty face. Stacy, Quinn, Jim, I see you all on here. Matt, Nick, Susie, Fallon, Sana, thank you all for being here. Judy, I see you too. Phoebe, you and I have been communicating privately. Phoebe is a lead for the Lead for Minnesota project. Phoebe is a fellow that's going to be working. Hi, Phoebe, I see you. Phoebe's going to be leading Lead for Minnesota as a fellow for Little Falls, Minnesota. I see you, Joan. I see so many people. I know Mary Jo Forsberg personally. My stepchildren are related to her. So I know her personally. So thank you for that. What I want to say is come visit us. Just come visit us. Come show us what we need to know. And thank you for your insight and inspiration and your stories. So thank you.
Beautiful.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Arlene. And I will make sure I fix the slides and make sure I list Sprout on there. That was a small oversight, but
No, it's totally okay. We're good.
No, I'm gonna fix that. I have to. It's a thing for me. It's a thing. To give credit where credit is due. So thanks so much for the opportunity. And
No problem.
we'll keep marching forward, and we'll get to the other side of this. Believe it or not, we will. And the children are the carriers of hope. And so if you have children in your life, or you can get to some children or be around them, that is my best advice. As my children are waiting at the door, and Stacey's kids are probably waiting too.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you guys so much. I'm so appreciative of this. Thank you guys for your time, for everybody, and the presenters. You guys did awesome. Thank you very much.
Beautiful. Thank you.
you.
Oh,